Australia's economy depends on China. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian Heise here and welcome to another episode of Heise Says. Stein in hand, I thought we'd look at this article from news.com.au which discusses just how dependent our economy is on China. Now if you've watched any of my videos over time, you'd see I make reference to just how much of our export market goes to China, and my concern that if they have a slowdown, it could flow through to the rest of Australia. Now our politicians are arguing that, China will somehow generate increased domestic demand for our goods and services, so we should be fine. I'd say that's probably hope, not policy. So let's read through this article. Figures show how much Australia's economy relies on China. China has grown to become Australia's largest trading partner, but has the economy come to rely on them too much? And particularly in the data, and we'll jump here. This is from the Observatory of Economic Complexity. I'll bring that up. Here's the link below if you want to go through it. It just shows you every country in the world, the complexity of their nation, what their exports are, and where they're heading to. And we'll look at this in greater detail. But one thing this doesn't really capture is, these are what we're importing, is our service sector. Particularly how much of our education, foreign education, or foreign students are coming from China, or how much of our property investment came from China. So we'll jump back to this article. Over the years, Australia has come to rely heavily on China for much of our economic prosperity, but could we survive without them? China is Australia's largest trading partner, and a paper released this week highlighted the scary scenario that we could face if its economy nosedived. On Thursday, PricewaterhouseCoopers chief economist Jeremy Thorpe released a paper on China Matters about what would happen to Australia if China's economy experienced a hard landing, defined as a sudden decline in GDP growth of about 3 to 5%. So a decline in just their growth, not a decline in their GDP of that much. So they're not going to negative, that's what I'm saying. He pointed to modelling from Deloitte that predicted it could cost Australia's national income 140 billion and 550,000 job losses. So 7% of our national income. It comes after the Centre of Independent Studies warned this month that the heavy reliance of some universities on fees from overseas students, especially those from China, was a financial risk to the government and taxpayers. And there's been article after article recently coming out just how a lot of students have, well, even the foreign students have issue because they're not getting to meet enough Australians in their courses, and they need to learn English off the Australian students. I remember group assignments back in the day when I went through, and there's some people that could speak no English. We're at university. It seems Australia has become increasingly reliant on Chinese money, something that could have serious consequences if China's economy starts to falter or if it starts to throw its weight around politically. But Roland Jarge, Lowy Institute's Director of International Economy Program, said, talking about Australia being dependent on China could be misleading. It's better to think of our economies as being heavily integrated and interdependent, he said. He said it was important not to overstate China's importance to the Australian economy, and that interdependence was very different from dependence when it comes to what one side can push the other to do. However, Mr. Raj acknowledged Australia's economic relationship with China was influencing the current country's politics and diplomatic relations. Clearly, there's some tension between our economic interest in the relationship with China and our broader national interests, he said. Having said that, in my view, the government has done a decent job of pursuing our interests without unnecessarily conflating issues of sovereignty and issues of economics. For instance, we've put in place the foreign interference laws effectively banning Huawei from being involved in our 5G network and taken over targeted decisions. There is no denying China's influence on Australian economy, and some believe Australia should be looking for opportunities in other overseas markets to provide some long-term insurance for the economy. And this is how much we rely on China. They buy our stuff. So when you look at who buys our goods and services, there's only one game in town: China. China is overwhelmingly our largest export destination and consumes 30.6% of our total exports, according to DFAT. It hungers for our minerals, resources and education services, is worth over $123.3 billion to Australia. Our next biggest export market is Japan, which consumes around 12.7% of our exports. Then comes the Republic of Korea, United States, and India. The Australian goods China loves most in 2017-2018 were iron ore and concentrates, coal, natural gas, and gold. Gold. Funny that. When it comes to services, it spent $11.7 million on education-related travel, which includes students' expenditure on tuition fees and living expenses. That's not that much. Is that right? Only $11 million? That's not very much at all. So they're saying here iron ore is only 51 million, and the data I've got here is showing it's a bit more. Hang on, we'll have a look. Iron ore. Well, our total iron ore market is 48.2 billion, and is only 50 million of that going to China? We'd have to see. We would have to see. So the Chinese also spent 4.1 million on other personal travel. So Australia's top 10 export markets: China, Japan, Korea. I mean, you can see here, China's right at the top. But we also buy their stuff. Yes, China is also Australia's most important partners for imports. In 2017-18, Australia bought 71.3 billion worth of goods and services from China. This equaled 18% of Australia's total imports. The Chinese goods we buy the most are telecom equipment and parts, computers, furniture, mattresses and cushions, and prams, toys, games and sporting goods. The next most important partner was the United States, which provided us with 48.8 billion in goods and services, making up 12.3% of Australia's imports. Overall, the most popular Australian imports are for personal travel, cars, refined petroleum, ships, boats, floating structures, and telecom equipment and parts. Foreign investment. China doesn't dominate in every sector. And when it comes to foreign investments, the United States is our largest investor by a mile. The US made $896.9 billion worth of investments in Australia by the end of 2017 through things like buying stocks or bonds in Australian companies, starting new businesses, or buying 10% or more of a local business. In contrast, China was our ninth biggest investor, spending $65 billion. Its contribution was dwarfed by the United Kingdom, $481.4 billion, and even Belgium on $305.3 billion. Hong Kong, which is a special administrative region of China for now, was the fifth biggest investor with a total investment of $116.6 billion. But even if you add Hong Kong and China's investments, that would still only equate to $181.6 billion, much lower than other countries. In 2018, the Australian Bureau of Statistics study commissioned by the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Austrade showed foreign direct investment in Australia supported the employment of nearly 1.2 million people, or 1 in 10 jobs. Direct investment includes investment in businesses, but not the purchase of securities like stocks. Australia also made its own foreign investments in other countries, with $2.3 trillion invested at the end of 2017. Australia also makes its own foreign investment in other countries. Oh, I read that again. The United States received the largest portion of Australian investment overseas, again by a wide margin, accounting for $664.5 billion at the end of 2017. So here's an interesting one: the university students. Australian universities have come to rely on international students as cash cows to keep the money flowing in and to boost their position on global university rankings. Yes, I would say that's actually quite true. I remember, some of my friends at universities were treated like cash cows. Universities boosted their revenue by 6% from $19 billion in 2008 to $32 billion in 2017, and about 2/3 of this was driven by increased international student fees. About 10% of all the university students now come from China, and this is worth an estimated $2 billion to Australian universities. The Centre for Independent Studies warned this month that the heavy reliance of some institutions on fees from overseas students, especially those from China, was a financial risk to the government and taxpayers. A CSI report found the University of Sydney led the country in generating more than $500 million in 2017 from Chinese student fees, making up about 23% of its total $2 billion revenue. This was followed by the UNSW on 22%, UTS on 19%. And now UTS is also giving women bonus points to their entry scores for engineering. But, you know, at these levels of exposure, even small percentage decline in Chinese student numbers could induce significant financial hardship, the report suggested. Large percentage declines could be catastrophic. A 25% fall in Chinese student enrollments would likely hit annual revenues at 2017 levels by more than $100 million at each of Sydney, UNSW, and probably Melbourne. Well, that shows you. Here's the estimates fees from Chinese students. How much of that, though, is pissed away on administrative staff that you don't need? You know, I would bet a carton on it. Bet a carton, just seeing how much of the growth in non-productive staff at universities, in administrative staff, in just all the committees and BS they have, and the political correctness and wokeness at universities. Estimated Chinese student fees as percent of revenue in universities: Queensland 14%, Sydney 23%, New South Wales, UTS, there you go. They're dependent on them. The report said 50% fall in numbers, which could happen if the Chinese government imposed strict currency controls, would be $1 billion revenue hit across the 7 institutions. The report also criticized universities for not providing more transparent information about where the international students came from. Only Adelaide reports international student numbers by country of origin in its annual report, so the CIS estimate figures for its report using figures provided by media reports, the NSW Audit Office, and the Department of Education and Training. Considering the scale of their China exposure, the China risk obfuscation practiced by Australian universities and their regulators is unconscionable, it said. So tourism. I need a coffee, guys, if I'm stumbling this much. Tourism is a big attraction. More than 9 million international visitors came to Australia each year, and on this measure, China also dominates. It is the largest source of tourists in Australia, with 1.5 million Chinese visitors travelling to the country in 2017-18, an increase in 12.9% from the year before. It's followed by New Zealand on 1.4, the United States on 788, United Kingdom on 742, and Japan on 442. Chinese tourists also spent more than those from other countries, splashing out 11.2 million in total, compared to 3.7 from US, 3.5 from UK, and 2.5 from New Zealand, and 1.8 from Japan. Tourism. Bloody hell, I'm getting tired. Tourism is Australia's largest service export and brings in $21.6 million a year, making up about 5.4% of exports. There you go. So it's tourism, it's university education, and foreign investment, not as much. Particularly our export markets, our raw materials, and the cheap goods that we're getting from China. What do you think, guys? Do you think Australia is too dependent on China? I think it is. I think it's a concern, and maybe there are other opportunities out there. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Take care.